Good evening. We're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Dr. Foley, roll call.
President Reese, members of the board, please let the record show that 4 members are present.
Thank you. It's my understanding Mrs. Anderson is on her way. All right. We're going to go ahead and have a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. All right. I move that we approve the agenda as it's presented.
Second.
Any questions or comments regarding the agenda? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 That motion carries 4-0. Dr. Foley, the superintendent's report, please.
President Reese, members of the board, we're excited tonight to start off with recognitions and celebrations. This morning, Board Member Schultz and Vice President Joe Wilson were able to join myself and Sherry Richards and other members of Cabinet when we acknowledged the recipient, Jeffrey Bickle, for his Exemplary Principal Award in Maricopa. He was one of 7, and it was a brilliant assembly as we watched the entire school body welcome him and surprise him. We were all moved to tears, including Mr. Bickle, so that was a pretty fantastic start to the day and something we're really happy to celebrate today. Tonight, we are also excited. We have some state champions in the house who we want to acknowledge and celebrate. So I'm going to ask Mr. Dilly to come up and highlight our state champions girls in lacrosse.
All right, where do you want me to stand? Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to ask the Coach Whitney and our awesome team to come up, please. These, you guys are the ones they want to see. Come on up, please. All right, as they're on their way up, we are missing a couple, but this is a great turnout, ladies. Thank you for coming. So, a little backstory, because Coach Whitney, who I'm going to turn it over to in 1 second, is too modest to say what I'm about to say, so I'll say it for her. We were blessed to start a lacrosse team, boys and girls, 3 years ago. The first year of the ladies, they were a JV program, and it was fun to watch because lacrosse is actually a super fun sport to watch, very fast. If you like soccer, like hockey, like football, it's kind of a combination of all of those, and it's awesome. But the first year in JV was interesting, is how we'll say it. And the growth between just 3 years ago and them beating Xavier for the state championship 2 weeks ago, 18-9. And in the process, they capped an undefeated season. And it wasn't even close, quite frankly. Most of the games against schools who have had programs for many, many years were not close. And so it's really cool to see the growth that they've come. That's a credit to these ladies, and it's a credit to Coach Whitney Levitt. I'm going to turn the time over to her.
Gosh, okay. I wasn't expecting to talk tonight, but I'll talk for a few minutes, and mainly I'm going to talk about these wonderful young ladies. This is our entire team. This is, I would say, 3/4 of our varsity program, but these are the girls that we should be acknowledging. They're the ones that have been committed from day one, from the start of the season, and I'm not an easy coach. So they've been through the ringer, just been put to the test a lot this season. Let's see. Where are our seniors? No seniors here tonight. Show my juniors. Stand up. Let's see where our juniors are. Okay, stand up. Okay, so we have 3 juniors, and four. Out of these 4 juniors, these were all girls that started with our program 3 years ago, except for Brooklyn on the very end. But she's a unique situation because she just started playing last year, and she made varsity after like 4 practices, so woot-woot to Brooklyn. Becca, Taylor, they started playing for the first time ever, putting a stick in their hand 3 seasons ago. And here they are, state champions. That's just amazing. step back. You guys are awesome. And then my sophomores, stand up. Noelle. We have a few other sophomores, but Noelle gets a shout out because she just made All-State as a sophomore for the state of, don't step back, stay there, girl, own it. Pretty incredible. Okay, you can step back now. And then freshmen. Look at all these freshmen. Amazing. And all of these girls started playing lacrosse, like 6 years ago? 7? I don't even know, but I started coaching them pretty young, about 6 years ago. Some of them maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And they've definitely brought up the level of play for our girls lacrosse this year, and they are a huge attribution to why we had success. So awesome job, freshmen. You guys can step back. Putting you on the spot. Really, I think the one thing that sets our team apart from any other program is obviously the support that we get from Higley, specifically our athletic director, who's amazing, you guys know. But also these girls, they are completely in one supporting of each other. And you don't really see that with a lot of other teams. You see a lot of just specific players who stand out. This group meshes, and they are cohesive and they're unified. And that's why we won the state champs. That's all I'm going to say. All right.
Thank you. All right, let's take some photos here.
Thank you. Okay, and to continue with the superintendent's report, as you can see, we have some celebrations in the next week as we prepare to honor our graduating class with our senior classes on their fields. And then in the month of June, we've got lots of meetings too. So I want to thank those of you who came tonight. We appreciate you coming. And that concludes our report.
All right, thank you, Dr. Foley. And I just want to make note that June 9th meeting is at 10 a.m., so it is different. All right. Do we have any board comment or any request to speak, Mrs. Reach? No, okay. Oh, then you'll need to fill out a little form. Okay. All right. So we will do our board comments while we get our forms for request to speak.
President Reese.
Mrs. Wilson.
We have all been to many awards in the last few weeks since our last meeting, and I just want to shout out to all those principals, all the teachers who have taken that extra time to put together those award ceremonies for us to attend. It's been exciting to see all the concerts that have taken place. Some of those elementary concerts sound like they should be in high school playing those instruments, and I'm really proud of those kiddos. And just a shout out to all of our principals, all of the teachers who have made those concerts, those events happen, because that's no easy feat. Thank you.
That is true. And for a lot of these kiddos, this was their first concerts of the year. They had not been able to participate previously, and so there was a lot of effort and work that they've worked really hard in putting this together. Any other board comments?
President Reese, if you don't mind.
Mrs. Anderson?
I just want to go off the superintendent report and I just had a list of congratulations to a lot of people and teams and groups. So congratulations to all the sports teams, especially the ones that came in. Phenomenal job. Congratulations to the high school underclassmen and the seniors for all their awards. A lot of achievements have been done this year. Congratulations to all the CTE students with their certification exams. That was remarkable to see the numbers with those. I want to say thank you to the counselors for their patience and communication to students and parents, and ensuring that all options have been exhausted for successful student graduation, and identifying the Advanced Honor for Excellence in Academic Diploma and Advanced STEM Diploma. I also want to say thank you to, I believe, is it Chartwell's that provides the foods? At the Teacher Appreciation Breakfast, Chartwell donated all the food. Is that correct? They did, and it was a very delicious and very classy spread. Lack of a better word, I apologize. And congratulations to the Teacher of the Year. And I just want to point out for the comments for the Teacher of the Year, it was pretty, hearing the kids speak, being a teacher, none of the kids spoke about, oh, you know, I'm so glad, you know, my teacher taught me how to add numbers the best or spell the best or whatever the best. It was my teacher made me feel the best here, taught me the best, cared about me. There were just so many comments about how the teacher and the relationship, which is a lot of what it's all about. Congratulations to the support staff, or thank you support staff, Chris Good and Ray Madrid, and all involved in repairing the irrigation line at Higley High School and providing water for baseball at that time. Thank you to the security team at the high schools for monitoring the sites for senior pranks. I think we have a few more days to go. Thank you for sanitizing, Chris and the custodial staff for sanitizing the schools, keeping them clean and safe as best as possible. And thank you to the HCPA staff for the commitment to the Higley and the community. I believe I counted 14 events in 2 weeks. Forgive me if I'm off a little bit. So thank you so much for providing those opportunities and making them all go well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other board comments? We also had our first retiree reception, which was amazing. I really enjoyed the format, and I think it was a great way to honor our staff for that are retiring. So I really enjoyed that too. And we have been everywhere. So we've made up time for sure. All right. With that, if we have no other board comments, then we will go on to our request to speak. Okay, we'll wait until we get to that item. All right. Then we will move on to our consent agenda. I move that we approve the consent agenda as it's presented.
Second.
Any questions or comments regarding consent? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That motion carries 5-0. Dr. Foley, would you like to take over for a moment?
I would. President Reese, members of the board, with the approval of the consent agenda, we have some congratulations that we would like to acknowledge in the administrator ranks who are joining our team. In the audience tonight, you have just approved Mr. Jim Pasek, who will be our Director of Technology, who comes to us with years of experience, and we are thrilled to have him on our team. You have also approved Ms. Kristen Koch being named as the Assistant Principal at Williamsfield, and we are so proud to watch her continue to grow up in here in Higley, and she's been a rock star, and we're proud of her. And we also have another one of our own who is moving up into a position, as we've approved Mr. Moore for the CFO. We have just approved Ms. Sharon Rushkamp as the Director of Finance, who is also one of ours. And so we're real proud of the additions and the quality of people on our team. And thank you for your approval tonight.
Thank you and congratulations. And we're excited for new positions, and we wish you the best for sure. All right. Then we will go on to information item 7.1. Ms. Martins, we have a health insurance update, please.
Good evening, President Reese, Vice President Wilson, members of the board, our community, my fellow colleagues. This is an update from the last meeting in which I had presented at the April 21st meeting related to our benefits updated, or pardon me, our benefits update. Next slide, please. We had some modifications from that last time until now. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to bring it to the board sooner because of the fact that we didn't have a board meeting until today in terms of scheduled time. However, as you probably saw in the superintendent's report, I had reported it as soon as we were made aware of the initial change, as well as we did communicate the information to our employees. But essentially, as we moved forward on our new benefits platform, the old IMED provider wasn't going to fit with that. And so that was really kind of a disconnect in the sense that if we're moving to this whole new platform to be able to ease transition, benefit in terms of enrollment, and then being able to access information 24/7 on this new web component, it didn't make sense that we had an outlier. And so we were able to switch to VSP through Principal, who also is the vendor that is helping us with the e-benefit solver platform. There is a slight cost and increase to employees. However, there are other benefits that kind of, in my perspective, offset some of that. So when you look at IMED versus VSP, you can see there are slight increases in the different plan tiers. One thing I do have to edit that I just noted before coming in here, I missed punch, and VSP should actually be 545 and not 549. I'll make sure that Ms. Reach has that information to update the slide. But in regards to overall comparability, we have a 2-year rate guarantee, just like we had with the other one. As I mentioned earlier, the platform in terms of the compatibility, as well as VSP does have a wider selection of retail providers. So they have Costco and Target, for example, where IMED did not cover in those areas. And overall, in terms of the in-network provider, there is a cost savings for individuals with eye exams in which they have dilation services, and it's a $15 cost savings than what had been previously. And there are also additional cost savings in regards to frames and electable contact lenses if our members do in-network providers. So there's some additional cost savings in those areas that individuals will see with a slight increase in terms of the overall plan tier amounts for the monthly premiums. So I apologize that this came later, but I did want to make sure that publicly we updated the board as well as all the other community members who we reference back to the board meetings and have correct information.
Perfect.
Outside of that, I'll entertain any questions.
Questions? Perfect. Thank you for clarifying that. All right, we're going to go on to 7.2, which is our third review of the study packet and financial information for a possible bond election, November 2nd, 2021. Mr. Gadd, Mr. Moore.
I will take, Madam President, the summary PowerPoint that you have at your desk, and then Mr. Moore will take the financial portion of that second PowerPoint. This is the third and final review of the proposed bond election. We've been through this a few times. But again, if you have some last-minute questions, I expect this is the time to ask those, because at the June 9th meeting, you'll have the resolution to approve to actually call for the election. So with that, I will go through the PowerPoint rather quickly. Some highlights, the second page. The capital funding has been improved for the district because of the restoration at the state level of the previous reduction taken by the state some years ago. So we're back to full funding on capital outlay, approximately $500 a student. Technology funding is a considerable emphasis in the bond. So that's, as you would expect, that's important, and that's included in a significant amount. Energy conservation is included, safety and security is included. We have recognized money for maintenance quite a bit to especially pay attention to the older buildings in the district. We have eliminated reliance on the M&O capital transfer so we can spend more money in M&O, and that's going to be helpful to the district's instructional programs. We also have included a taxpayer saving items, a large one. That's to prepay the lease that we have of the 2 leases. One of them is included in its entirety here. That will save a considerable amount of taxpayer funds, somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million. So taxpayers should be pleased with that, and I commend the board for wanting to try to help that situation become more of a reality. The budget highlights, again, we've talked about some of these. We have a 5-year maintenance plan included in the listing. So I think it's very adequately funded to make sure that our buildings stay up in the shape that they should be. We have a set aside for any major construction projects that the board may find that are necessary in the next 5 years. So there's money set aside for that purpose. And as I say, we've completely stopped now the M&O transfer to capital by taking care of the lease payment subject. So now with the bond and what we've already done with the regular capital budget, we are now transfer free of M&O to capital, and now can spend that M&O money on programming and those kind of things that go more directly with kids. And we have the purchase of the 1 middle school. Potential land purchasing is included. We've talked to the board previously about the need for a potential site in the northern part of the district. I know we just received an enrollment update from our demographic consultant. Dr. Fowler shared that with me, and there is some growth projected up in that area, considerable growth. So I think this is a good move for the district. I think it gives you a second site, a more desirable site maybe than the first one, and it certainly doesn't hurt. You won't pay any taxes on it because we're a governmental entity, and at the rate of appreciation of property, I think if you ever did decide to sell it, you'd probably make an awful lot of money at it. So I'm glad that this one is included. And then a minimal tax rate increase, about 14 cents. So it goes flat after that first increase in 22-23. So it's a very small increase in the tax rate that's been projected. And we are going to be using with this proposal $95 million of the $129 million available bonding capacity. So we will be using a sizable amount of that, but as Mr. Tyler will report to you, Mr. Moore will report to you, the bonding capacity grows considerably over the next few years if the projection of increase in property values is there and some other things. So I don't think it'll be awfully long before you've gained back enough bonding capacity to do a second bond and whatever those needs are at that point in time. I don't think that's too far off. And the last, I think it's the last page. Yeah, the last page of the summary lists again for you the items that we've just described. It gives you the percentages of the total bond that we intend to spend on each of those. It provides a contingency that I think is going to be helpful, especially with the rising prices in maintenance and construction. So with that, Madam President, members of the board, if you have any last questions on the bond proposal, we'll be happy to try to answer them for you.
Any questions?
President Reese.
Mrs. Wilson?
Dr. Foley, if anyone had a question, who should they reach out to if they have questions, if our community has a question about this? Who would you like them to reach out to?
President Reese, Vice President Wilson, we would encourage them to reach out to the district office, to reach out to myself, and we would schedule a time to answer questions to the best of our ability we would share the information that we've already publicly done, obviously, so that they could answer any questions. At the June 9th meeting is when we would look for a resolution to call for, if we determine to call for, and at that point, then different information comes out, and informational, factual sessions are held, and all those things. things. But if people have questions, please reach out to myself, and we will schedule a time to answer and help you understand and to look at some of the very information that we've literally been talking about since October in preparation for this conversation.
Thank you.
Madam President, Mr. Moore would be happy to present you that second PowerPoint if you'd like him to do that.
Anyone? Do we need that additional information, or? I think we're good. You guys have been pretty detailed, so, and we will, like Dr. Foley said, we will have discussion and look for a resolution on June 9th, so. Mr. Moore, is there?
Well, I mean, yeah, if we don't want to go through the financial PowerPoint, I mean, it's more power to me. But I did
It's
have
his job, let him do it.
I did have a short PowerPoint just to kind of tie together the financial implications that this bond would impose on the district.
President Reese, would you like him to share those, or are you comfortable with what's been presented?
We'll have Mr. Moore share those.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Good evening, President Reese, members of the board. Like Mr. Gadd mentioned, we are, bringing our third review, and this short presentation, would kind of tie together some of the aspects that we've been talking about in terms of some of these definitions. And next slide, please. So you've heard us mention some of these definitions in some of our conversations. I just wanted to kind of put these out there just so we can provide some context to these. I'm not going to read these verbatim, but assessed valuation, we've thrown that number out there a lot. That is, you've seen it on your property tax bill. It's determined by the assessor's office. Most residential, it cannot increase more than 5% in a fiscal year. So if you see a lot of times your residential value on Zillow, right, is way high, your assessed valuation is typically trying to catch up to that. So that has an impact on our capacity as we continue to grow over the next few years. The next bullet there is the secondary tax rate. As you know, the Class B bonds are against our secondary tax rate, not our primary tax rate. Our primary tax rate is our M&O, our capital, and our adjacent ways. That tax rate is determined by those three funds in particular. And our secondary tax rate is those overrides, bond issues, both capital and M&O override. As you know, we currently have an M&O override, which is approximately 61 cents per $100 of assessed valuation. And I believe we just authorized that in 2019. So, lastly, the bonding capacity, that should read 20% of the assessed valuation, not 30. But there's a constitutional limit that limits districts, unified districts, that can bond up to 20% of their assessed valuation. So I'll expand on that in the next slide. So the assessed valuation's impact on our tax base. You'll notice how we continue to grow in the far right column is our estimated assessed valuation. Everything up until 2021 is accurate and current. So everything after that is projected. So that is anticipated growth we've put out there 5.7%, which is very conservative considering we've grown 8.5% in this current year. So as that assessed valuation grows, so does our bonding capacity. As a reminder, our district is largely residential, so we're not going to see a huge amount of growth over the years. We're approximately 86% residential, 11% commercial. So our AV is going to reach a limit at some point in the near future as our land and our vacant land gets bought up and used for residential buildings. So that bonding capacity will hit a limit. The next slide, please. So as Mr. Gadd mentioned, there is a small 14-cent increase. You'll notice in this current year, this is your current tax rate at 158 on the secondary tax rate. Remember, you have a primary and secondary rate. This is not your overall. So your secondary tax rate, which is your bond, or current bond, and our M&O override, is approximately $1.58 per $100 of assessed valuation. The 14-cent decrease is going to happen next year regardless, because we don't have a bond. Even if you authorize a bond now, we would not be able to sell until 22. So you're going to see a decrease next year, which is why we mentioned there's going to be a 14-cent increase, because when we go to potentially sell in 22, 23, you're going to see that 14-cent increase. So essentially, we're going down and then back to where we were. We're pretty much staying flat in terms of our tax implications to our residents. Next slide, please. So here's a projected property tax bill. We included both a residential and commercial valuation. So on a $246,000 home, which is, I don't know where you're going to find that right now, but that would be an estimated cost, and it shouldn't read increase because, like I just mentioned, it's essentially going to be the same property tax bill you're seeing currently. Would be $140 per year. And then on a commercial business, that should read business, not home, approximately $1.1 million. Their annual secondary tax rate would be $1,030. So you can see it's a very minimal implication to both our residential and businesses. And again, districts are forced to go to this secondary tax rate due to our funding sources being restricted. I think it just came out that we were again 48th in funding still on the annual demographic survey. So we're still forced to go to these sources of funding as a public school district to kind of get the funding that we need to get our buildings, our M&O costs up to speed. So next slide, please. And then again, we talked about bonding capacity. So currently Jeff mentioned, in the 21-22 year, we would have approximately $129 million in bonding capacity. We're proposing $95 million to not go to that full 100% bonding capacity. That does limit our potential in the years preceding this. You'll see how it decreases in 23, 24, and 25. And then as our assessed valuation catches up to our bonding capacity in that 25-26 area, that's where we've kind of earmarked another potential bond sale that would put us 5 years out. If we do authorize this bond and we proceed with our current plan of 5 years, that 25-26 timeline would be a potential area where we can do another bond sale. Now, reminder, this is just bonding capacity and does not authorize the district to pursue bonds. We still need the authorization from the board to authorize to go out for a bond and that dollar amount. So next slide, please. So we combined both the primary and secondary tax rates and kind of put our neighboring districts up here. Remember, the primary tax rate is your M&O, adjacent ways and capital, and then your secondary tax rates are all your voter-approved items, your M&O override, capital override, and your bonds. You'll see the highest tax rate is Queen Creek currently. Second to that would be Mesa. We are kind of sitting in the middle of this group here. And then, of course, Scottsdale and Paradise Valley, because of their AV is so high, their tax rates are extremely low. We just don't have that capacity in Higley. Scottsdale, 121 square miles, lots of commercial and residential. So we'll never reach that, but we are in competition with our competitors here. And I think we're very favorable in terms of comparing ourselves to other districts. Finally, we have our calendar of events. So if you go to the March-June timeline, that's kind of where we've been going with this presentation and our reviews. We've presented 3 reviews so far of the bond. As we move into this June and July timeline, we're going to ask the board for to approve a resolution. If that is approved, we will go into June and August, which we will have the voter pamphlet, which we'll have to approve the language on that. We'll ask for the board's pro statement. We'll also, at that time, start to schedule some what they call, I guess, road shows in Higley. We'll make our rounds to some neighborhoods, some communities, present informational, factual stuff regarding the bond and the stuff that we've presented to the board in our plans. And then September, it's going to be an all mail-in election this year. So September, October, pretty much all the ballots will be mailed out. And when we get to November election day, the decision will already be made in terms of whether we pass or whether we fail. So we feel confident in this kind of plan, and we feel like we have the community and the board's support going forward with what we presented. And if there's any questions regarding this timeline or any of the financial information that I presented.
President Reese, I just have one quick statement. I believe Governor Ducey at one point has mentioned that if we want more from our education, that the own towns need to pay for it, our own district needs to pay for it. If I'm paraphrasing correctly what he said, and I just think that's something to be pointed out, that our own governor says, he pays for the basic education, and then we have to pay for all the extra fluff. So I just think that's something to be said. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Sorry, I just have one question. How much, and this might have been addressed and I just forgot, how much does it cost us to do this, to go out to, what's the cost for that and the pamphlets and things like that?
Yeah, so there is an issuance cost along with this. Mr. Gabb will kind of go into.
It's about $2.50 per registered voter. That's what the county charges. So, it's significant. It's up in the $100,000 to $200,000 range.
Sure. Any other questions? No. Thank you for going through all the detail with us. All right, now we will go on to 7.3, and we have a request to speak. So we value the input from our constituents. This time has been set aside for anyone from the audience who wishes to address the board. Please remember, this is not an appropriate venue to evaluate, discuss, or criticize district personnel. Policy KEB provides a process for complaints about personnel. Speakers should be aware that false statements about individuals may result in civil liability. Members of the board may not discuss items that are not specifically identified on the agenda. Therefore, pursuant to ARS 38-431.01H, action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter, responding to any criticism, or scheduling the matter for further consideration and a decision at a later date. We ask that remarks be kept to 3 minutes. Mr. Edwards with the Mahoney Group, come on up.
Well, thank you, President Reese and Vice President Wilson and all the board members. It's a privilege to be here. It's been an honor to handle the insurance and the risk management needs of the district these past many years. There was a review set out this year on the insurance, and there was a little bit of confusion on that review as it took place. And so we reached out today, when we saw last night the review that came out. And so we reached out today to Dr. Foley's office, and her assistant had recommended us to speak with Mr. Hawes in his office to go over those concerns. And so we did that, and in the interest of time, I know that would have been a lot for them to put on their plate and revise everything and send it over. So we took the liberty to go ahead and do that, write it in real quick for that review so that the board would have full information tonight as you look at all of the factors in that review. And so I was going to speak after we look at the review, just to see what was included in the review, and then to help answer any questions and to be a resource after the review has gone forth. And so if that's okay, I'll yield until then, and then.
Our public comments prior.
Okay, all of them?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, sounds good. I'll just point out a few things then before we do the review. We went through an RFP process a couple of years ago, very proud of that and very proud of the results of that. We looked very closely at all of the factors for 6 years with Higley and came to some very definite and important conclusions about why the insurance should be moved. And so with a lot of concrete facts on that, we went forward. There was an RFP put out. We participated in that along with the trust and ultimately took over the insurance needs of the district. I'm just very proud of what we've done during that time. As you're looking over the review tonight with Mr. Hawes, I want you to remember a couple things. The district is exemplary in their risk management and loss control. And that goes from the top down, from district operations with Chris Good and his staff there, Fatima in HR, Josh Crosby in transportation, Mum in HR, Dr. Fowler in operations, and many others we have the privilege of working with. And because of that, Higley is one of the top tier districts in the eyes of insurance carriers and insurability. And because of that, we've been able to do what we've been able to do with the insurance and gain the favorable rates that we have. I want you to remember a key point tonight as you're looking through the review. Remember that the trust insures roughly 250 school districts and must account for that capacity within their limits. Higley is one, and they stand alone. And so those limits are appropriate and good for the district. This plan was crafted specifically for them, and they benefit immensely in many ways from doing that. Many things were added to this program this year as far as flexibility with the council for claims. That includes Gus Rosenfeld, Udall Shumway as a choice of counsel during those claims, a dedicated employment attorney as well, in place of what you now have as prepaid legal. And my time is up. And so thank you for that. If you have any questions after the review, I'm here and happy to answer any questions regarding that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So with that, we will start our is that for our speak regarding the same subject? I'll take it. All right, so this is also on the same agenda item. So Mr. Cole, we'll go ahead and invite you up. You also have 3 minutes. Looks like you're with the trust, is that correct?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Reese, Vice President Wilson, and board members, thank you for allowing me to be here today. My name is Ryan Cole. I'm with the Arizona School Risk Retention Trust, and I just want to provide a little bit of background and history into our relationship with the trust and why the trust was formed. The trust was formed 35 years ago in 1986 as a self-insured pool for public entities for school districts across the state. We started out with 5 districts in rural Arizona. It has since grown to 247 members, so we're about the 250 member mark. Over that 35 years of operations, what pools have done and what the trust has been able to do is really to find a niche market for schools. We know the coverage that Arizona schools and community colleges need. And we've been able to refine our coverage agreements and the policies in order to meet those needs of Arizona schools. We are governed by and for the membership. We have a governing board of directors that's made up of school district administrators from across the state, some of your neighbors as well, in Higley, Mesa, and Chandler. They're helping to direct the vision and the mission of the trust to make sure that we're providing the appropriate coverages for members. Again, I mentioned over the past 35 years, we've been able to hone that coverage agreement specifically for Arizona school districts and community colleges. That includes offering high limits, up to $50 million in liability limits for districts, which we feel is vital in protecting Arizona schools. We also have low deductibles, broad coverage, where we're able to lean into coverage, as well as favorable terms and conditions within that coverage. We know Arizona claim adjusting. We know what it takes. We have the appropriate staff that's been in place for many years to adjudicate those claims. The number of claims that we've handled for Arizona schools since 1986 is 57,000, and that represents $674 million in claims payments. Again, in the discussion of the liability limits for the districts, we feel that $50 million is absolutely appropriate for districts. We have a couple examples within that. We had a district up in northern Arizona in 1996, an auto liability claim with a bus accident. The total settlement for that was $28 million. At the time, the district had a $10 million policy. They then, shortly thereafter, joined the trust. The second example, down in southern Arizona, a little more recent, 2006, general liability claim after a basketball game. The crowd and some players dogpiled one of the players, and that was a $25 million settlement. The commercial insurer, after that claim, canceled the policy, and the district subsequently joined the trust. So again, those are old claims, but social inflation is a factor that we look at as well. But we routinely receive large demands greater than $16 million in liability limits. If the district has students, if you have athletic activities, you have public on your campus, if you employ staff, then $16 million in limits we don't feel is appropriate. We feel that we've crafted that coverage to fully protect districts. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to further discussion.
Thank you. All right, as we go on to 7.3, we will be receiving a presentation for, as we've had two speakers here, for both the Mahoney Group and for the Trust. This is for our liability workers' comp insurance. We'll notice we do have an action item coming up. It is important that we direct our questions to Dr. Foley during the presentation or thereafter. A specific recommendation is not being made. When we get to 8.1, the board will have to determine which policy, which package we choose for our district. So with that said, I will turn it over to Dr. Foley so we can start our presentation process.
Thank you, President Reese, members of the board. Tonight we have an important topic, and this is one actually we've been talking about for quite a while. It's been on our agenda as future topics. Back in September, when we did a renewal, there was great conversation with the board at the time that when it came time this year, as part of our processes and procedures, that we do a thorough review and we bring recommendations for the board to make a decision, which is what we're doing this evening. We've also been talking with, and again, as President Reese has shared, this is workman's comp and liability, but this also has a lot to do with our legal services, and we've talked about to do an in-house or an outsource, or what does it mean for us in our district, and this is this conversation. So again, one of the things that we've done and that we did as a team is we collected those quotes and worked with attorneys, with Dustin Rosenfeld, because with our current carrier, the Mahoney Group, if anything had ever gone to a claim, the preferred attorney group that we were to work with in those cases was Dustin Rosenfeld, who are one of the two law firms that are experts in educational law and all things encompassed with them, okay? So these would be our attorneys, regardless of whichever vendor you choose choose to go with. And what they've done is they have thoroughly reviewed these proposals. They have been in consultation, even up to today, in conversations, clarifications, for them to discuss with and to provide clarity for, answer questions, dispel misinformation, or to understand and probe this, because this is an important decision. The dollar amount to this is huge. And we want to make, obviously, the best decision possible for our district. The one thing that your cabinet members want you to know is that while we are not experts in insurance, we are experts in our field. And we would hope that we also have experience in utilizing both of these resources. And so we also are here to share, if you have questions and would like to know our experiences or our perspectives, we do have those prepared to share if you would like that information as well as you prepare to make a decision tonight. So tonight is important. We are sort of at a time crunch here because regardless of where we go tonight, there are changes in the existing policy if it were to stay with the current carrier or move to a different one that require background on the backside. We've got to get it finalized, trained, rolled out so that we don't skip a beat, because there's an awful lot of that involves all of us and training and our resources. So this is something we don't take lightly. And again, been working with getting information, took some time to get the information as we've kept you posted and up to date in our status reports of this. So here we are tonight with an important decision to make. So I'm going to turn it over to our attorneys from Gustin Rosenfeld, both Rob Haas and Jennifer McLennan, who will kind of walk through the cost proposals for both insurance companies. And we ask that you please ask questions, probe for information, clarify any information you would like to know, so that you have the information with them as a resource. And then again, your cabinet is here. If you have other questions for us, we are prepared to speak and share.
Good evening, President Reese, members of the board. Rob Haas with Gus Rosenfeld. My partner's with me, Jennifer McLennan. We're very pleased to be your lawyers. Our only effort tonight is to give you our best assessment of the proposals that are in front of you. There is a little bit of a urgency to this. Your policies are set to expire at the end of June, so there needs to be a decision made. We were asked to review the two insurance proposals that the district has received that were submitted by the Mahoney Group and the trust. And over the past several weeks, we've been doing that. We've met with staff to get their perspective and their input. We have posed questions, follow-up questions to each vendor. We've reviewed all of the materials that both vendors have submitted to the district. We've requested some supplemental information from the vendors as well. And had several follow-up phone calls with the vendors on that to make sure that there has been a thorough review of this, that we do understand the issues, and that we can come to you tonight with confidence in the information we're presenting to you.
Mr. Haas, I hate to interrupt you right at the beginning. I got an email today, very late in the afternoon, and it's very concerning to me as you were speaking that conversations have been going on for many, many weeks, and yet I get an email at the 9th hour this afternoon. Can you kind of talk me through the why that occurred? Because I'm very confused that happened when there's been multiple conversations happening for weeks.
Yes, absolutely. President Reese, Board Member Kaler, happy to answer that question. Of course, we want this to be we've tried to have this be an open process and make sure that people have had a chance to share what they want to share about their product and service. And so that's why we've had this ongoing review. I was as surprised as you, frankly, to get that late supplement today. In fact, I haven't even, I got it beeped on my phone as I was driving out here. Be that as it may, you know, we can come to you tonight with confidence that we've reviewed the proposals, understand them, and can highlight for you some of the differences some of the, what we perceive as advantages or disadvantages of each, and let you make the call. We don't really have a dog in this fight. As you may know, you're currently insured by Liberty Mutual. We are the law firm that Liberty Mutual uses when there is coverage for a claim. When there's not coverage, you can use whoever you want, and you use our firm and another firm. So the Mahoney Group's proposal, as you will see, we'll go over this. We have a short PowerPoint presentation and a spreadsheet that we'll go over. And Tyler may be jealous because we'll get into some numbers here. But the new insurer will not be the Liberty Mutual. The Mahoney's Group proposal basically is proposing new carriers, and the trust, you were previously insured by the trust but haven't been for a while. If the trust was selected, we would, in full disclosure, we would likely be continuing to work with the district, both on your day-to-day issues and when there is a claim to be made in many areas. Mr. Edwards has assured us, I have not seen verification of this from any of the carriers he's proposing, but he's assured us that he's gone to bat for the district to make sure that if the new carriers are selected, that you would have the option to continue to work with your preferred counsel. We are here as your lawyer to give you the best advice we can give you on the proposals. So with that, I'll turn the time over to Jennifer.
Madam President, members of the Governing Board, Jennifer McLennan, Gus Rosenfeld. So I'd like to take you through a brief PowerPoint that compares the two proposals side by side. We prepared this information based upon the proposals that were submitted by the Mahoney Group and by the Trust. Unlike Rob, I left a little bit later, so I was able to obtain that email that you received late in the day, and where possible, I'll try to address some of the discrepancies so that you have answers to those questions. So.
Just to let you know, I did not get the said email, so I have no idea what we're talking about with the email. So just to let you know.
Thank you.
We had accidentally, email address was incorrect on your.
Thank you. I will continue. So the district, as Mr. Haas has indicated, is currently insured through Liberty Mutual Insurance, and the insurance premiums that you have paid out this year are approximately $1,077,874. The cost for legal services to date is approximately $50,000. I have spoken with your business services department. They've indicated that they would expect those costs to rise to about $75,000 by the end of the year. Next slide, please. And we just want you to know that this is based on information we've received, not information that we are not coverage counselors. There is a specific type of lawyer that determines whether a claim is covered by an insurance policy. That's not Rob and I's forte. One of the terms that you'll see used in this PowerPoint presentation is the aggregate limit. An aggregate limit is a general limit that is the maximum for the insurance payable during a policy period. So you'll often see the used per occurrence and then per aggregate, and what that would mean, often it's 1 million per occurrence, 3 million per aggregate. That's one number that you'd see. And what that would mean would be that that particular policy would be up to the $3 million mark for all claims submitted under that policy. And that's exclusive of excess and umbrella coverage, which was one of the points raised in the late submitted information. So getting to general liability. The basic general liability policy for the Mahoney Group would offer $1 million in coverage. The trust is $10 million. Again, this is specific to the policy, not including the excess or the umbrella insurance. The excess liability coverage on the one entity would be $10 million. The excess liability on the other would be $40 million. Mr. Edwards did submit information indicating that on the general liability, the total in aggregate coverage is $18 million, $16 million per occurrence, $18 million in the aggregate. With respect to the employee benefits, this specific policy would be $1 million in coverage on the Mahoney side of the ledger. The Arizona Risk Retention Trust doesn't have a specified limit within theirs. Theirs is related to the general liability coverage policy that we covered on the first slide. $2 million in aggregate insurance for the employee benefit. With crisis management, again, on the Mahoney side of the ledger, $1 million in coverage, $1 million in aggregate, $1,000 deductible. This is addressed in the general liability coverage for the trust. Counseling and professional liability services, $1 million in coverage, $3 million in aggregate. And again, on the as Arizona Risk Retention Trust, this is covered with respect to the general liability. Sexual misconduct liability, Mahoney had $1 million in initial coverage, $3 million in aggregate. And again, this is exclusive of the excess insurance or umbrella insurance policies. Again, the Arizona Risk Retention Trust, that would be covered in their general liability.
But, excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No problem, Ms.
I have the email pulled up on my phone, and it's totally different numbers than what you're saying to me right now. So I'm not sure.
Sure.
I'm sorry. I hate to interrupt, but I know that like Mrs. Wilson didn't get the information, and the rest of us, and you didn't. Is there any chance that we can have this printed for us? Because.
So I can address it, and I think
Okay.
that it will be sufficient.
I just want to make sure that they're all aware since they didn't get the email.
And I guess
so
which is correct is also.
why don't we go back to the sexual misconduct liability slide? So in the information that was presented by the Mahoney Group, which you have in your folder, there is a specific line item for a sexual misconduct liability policy. And it says that it's $1 million each employee, $3 million in the aggregate. They have a limit of a $300,000 innocent party defense, a deductible of $0. So this is in the information that's in your packet that was provided. What the information submitted late indicates that that policy, those limitations, does not include the excess insurance or the umbrella policy. So if you add on the excess insurance, so once you reach those limits, you have an overriding umbrella that would govern the coverage. If you add on that, it would be $11 million per occurrence and $13 million in the aggregate. If you add on the aggregate, it would be plus $5 million in excess insurance with a $16 million per occurrence limit and an $18 million in the aggregate. That's at the high end. Whereas the trust, again, is a $40 million aggregate excess umbrella. So that is the difference in the numbers.
So each of these policies or benefits that you've just gone over, the general liability is one of them.
Correct.
And then the employee benefits liability, the trust addresses that in their general liability, but the Mahoney Group has something separate from general liability, and that's what we're looking at. So these are all separate coverages that is not in the general liability with the Mahoney Group, but it is in the general liability of the trust. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
With respect to the ones that we're getting to. We're going to get to another one quickly. We'll go through the director and officer slide, if you can get to that. Thank you. So again, this is taken from the proposals that were submitted, and those are the amounts listed therein. One difference between these two with respect to that policy is the deductible that the trust doesn't have. With respect to the auto liability slide, next, now we're talking about a different insurance policy. Okay, so Mahoney Group has $1 million in coverage, $1,000 deductible. Again, they also have the excess and umbrella insurance, so $16 million and $18 million. The trust has a $10 million coverage policy on that. Property insurance, both relate to the total insurable value. The Mahoney proposal had some flood and earthquake limitations. Those limitations are high. $10 million, $40 million, and there were deductibles that ranged between $5,000 to $40,000 on theirs. Commercial crime, the Mahoney Group has $1 million in coverage. The Arizona Risk Retention Trust has $1.5 million. The Mahoney Group has a $5,000 deductible trust has a 1,000. Cyber liability, this is a part of the trust's general liability coverage. The Mahoney Group has a $5 million coverage with a $25,000 deductible. Equipment breakdown, they're exactly the same. Storage tank liability, again, the same. Prepaid legal service. So with respect to the Mahoney Group, you would have access to prepaid legal services would be services that are not covered under a general insurance contract. With respect to the Mahoney Group, there would be access to a consultant, and the Mahoney Group has indicated that, as Mr. Hawes indicated, that we would be, both the law firms that the district currently uses would be available to be used on that. The Arizona Risk Retention Trust has $300,000 coverage of liability. They have a vendor list that's extensive of only Arizona firms that are able to answer questions with respect to prepaid legal. There is some difference between the proposals here in terms of what access you would have that is covered. The access to the consultant is a hotline of sorts with we're told, a local Arizona attorney for employment-related matters, but there may be other matters that you wouldn't have access to to generalized legal services. So, for instance, in this school year, that's where the $50,000 ticket came in for legal services, was because that would be general legal services that weren't covered under your existing insurance policy. Commercial package total, those numbers are here, and those are the numbers that are at the bottom of the spreadsheet that Mr. Hawes and I prepared as well. So, and that's without your workers' compensation. Your workers' compensation insurance, two different carriers, the Alliance and Copper Point, two different price points with respect to coverage, and $1 million on the Mahoney side, $500,000 coverage on the trust side. And the workers' compensation premiums are on this slide here. And so the total combined premiums on the Mahoney proposal, $1,009,807. On the trust proposal, $1,103,981. Less if you exclude administrative practices liability coverage or the prepaid legal option, then your premium would be $1,042,891. And I'll turn it back over to my partner, Rob Hawes. He's going to go through the spreadsheet.
Okay, so we also prepared a spreadsheet to try to put these side by side. So that you know how we did this, we took their proposals and kind of broke them out so that we're trying to give you the best apple-to-apple comparison that we can. So I don't know, yeah. Yes, there we go. Okay, so basically, some of the main differences, the trust has kind of one bigger policy, if you will, general liability policy. The Mahoney Group is proposing several policies to kind of be, comparable. Both would insure the district well. You're not choosing between good and bad here tonight. You're choosing between, good and better. You would be well insured under either scenario, in our view. But the trust has, when we talk about general liability, that's their major policy, and a lot of things fit under that, fit within that. And so you can see, we've tried to show you what the occurrence and aggregate numbers would be, realizing that both vendors are offering you an umbrella policy on top of that, and then an excess carrier on top of that, a reinsurance, basically. And that's how you see this, let's say, a $1 million occurrence. Okay, we have a bad event, your limit is 1 million. If you have but if you have aggregate, if you have 3 bad events, then your limit is 3 million. Then you have, on top of that, you stack your umbrella policy, which would be available under certain circumstances, and then your excess excess amounts on top of that. That's how you would ultimately get to what the Mahoney Group is proposing is the upward limit of $18 million, and the trust is proposing an upward limit of $50 million in coverage. And so we've set out the deductible, which is something of concern as well, and who the carrier would be. And so if you, I won't go through each page on that. Jennifer's pretty much covered that. But I would like to just touch on some of what we perceive as the benefits, the pros and cons of each proposal. One thing that to Board Member Kaler's concern, insurance, you want predictability, reliability, certainty, and the bit of a moving target is a concern to me. I will say that. That is at odds with what you are typically looking for when you're purchasing insurance. So, some of the pros and cons. One, you have a lower premium total with the Mahoney Group. You have higher coverage limits with the trust. And that's an insurance determination that consumers make all the time. You know, how much is enough, and what do you want to do on that? The higher coverage limits are something that we think is a pro for the trust, because if there was a catastrophic loss, it seems odd to sit here thinking you could get past $18 million, but you think about a full school bus where your driver is at fault and there are a number of serious injuries, and that is an issue for you to decide, is the trade-off between the somewhat lower premium and the higher coverage limit. The prepaid legal plan is also something that you should think about, in our view. Prepaid legal means day-to-day stuff, essentially, as opposed to a claim. When somebody gets hurt at work, that's a claim. It'll be handled by insurance. The prepaid legal is a plan that's available to you if you want it, where it's the day-to-day issues that are handled. You're prepaying for that, as opposed to using it as you go, which is what you've been doing now. Using it as you go, year to date for you so far is $50,000. That's not reflected in the Mahoney Group proposal. And so some of the advantages of the prepaid legal plan are it adds certainty of cost to you. You know what you will be paying for your day-to-day legal expenses over the course of the year, and it gives your business people an easier budget to deal with, because legal expenses aren't always like a car payment. They're not the same amount every month. They go up and down, whereas prepaid legal plan offers kind of a flat monthly fee.
Mr. Hawes, can I interrupt again?
Absolutely.
I'm so sorry.
We're here to answer your questions.
Okay. As we're talking about the cost of legal, I'd like to hear, as you offered us, Dr. Foley, can you maybe speak to the actual process that we have had with using the Mahoney for a legal situation? I was able to read in your status some situations with our special education, Shauna Miller provided for us, but is there, I see a dollar amount, but I want to know what we got in that dollar amount and what was the experience for that dollar amount. Does that make sense?
President Reese, Board Member Kaler, I'd be happy to speak to that. So I think one of the things that your cabinet administration has shared with you on multiple occasions, that one of the most important things is that we have the resources that we need when we need it. The legal is an important component to that. There's also, when we're talking about claims, and then we're also talking about day-to-day things. When it comes to legal firms in education, there are two, as I shared earlier, Udall Shumway and Gustin Rosenfeld. I will tell you that every educational conference, things issue go to, they always have the education attorneys. When laws change, and we're getting ready to get some that impact curriculum or that impact policies. We work with them for crafting our policies. We work with them for answering issues, questions, concerns. This year in COVID, they were our go-to, to be honest with you, as we were previewing and creating resources, because being that we weren't in a trust that created resources for districts, we were often borrowing what had been created, creating our own, then running it through our legal counsel or guidance. So we use them often and for various things, and they're kind of important. A phone call to Gustin Rosenfeld or to Udall Shumway is an important part of verifying and checking and us doing our work. Your cabinet team would not feel comfortable or be okay if you made any decision that allowed us not to have access to these two firms, whether we are holding aside money to use them for day-to-day or claims or otherwise. So know that to us is important, and we want to have access to those same resources. We were informed on Friday, there was and Rob Haas kind of referenced this came at 5 o'clock on Friday, that they had just confirmed that with that Munich RE, that new carrier, would allow us to use Gustin Rosenfeld and Udall Shumway if there were claims activity. So in other words, if you're going to be sued, right, that would be who you could use. But they had direct contact with Jackson Lewis Law Firm in Phoenix for day-to-day legal questions surrounding employment matters for no cost. One of the things that would be a problem for your admin team would be to use a law firm in which none of us know the names of the lawyers who they work with on a daily basis. I am sure we pulled it up in cabinet, looked at the law firm, looked at the lawyers. I am sure they're wonderful, reputable people, but they're nobody that the hundreds of years of experience around the table have had to work with or would use. It's important for us to be able to, when we have a SPED issue or a situation, be able to call the attorney, follow up on the attorney. You read in status an example of, for the first time, we have a case that is getting ready to go to potentially litigation. We claim that as the district, we've done nothing wrong. I mean, we could be sued because a student moves into a district and is claiming, you saw 2 districts are being listed in that. Obviously, this is the first time we've gone to claim, so we could be working, and again, with no offense to our current attorneys in the room, you have experts in each area. You have SPED might use on a day-to-day basis a lawyer with an expertise in SPED. MUM may use Jennifer McClellan for a employment issue. So you have, we may start with an issue with an attorney who has some background and has some knowledge with this. And if you change attorneys, you start all over again. So if we were to work with day-to-day counsel with someone who didn't know the schools or didn't know the students, it could be a real challenge. So you saw that for the first time we needed to potentially go to litigation. So knowing that the preferred law firm for that would be Gustin Rosenfeld. So we had to, again, and she explained her experience with having to, again, it was far different than just referring it and being done. And it was much more involved. And MUM, in a little bit, would speak to experiences with similar kind of things when you're going litigation resources and such. So if you'll go back to your question, what was different is that it's a little bit more involved and cumbersome to utilize the resource. That doesn't mean it's not there. It's important for us, again, your team doesn't really worry about, we need insurance. We're not worried about the name of the brand. We want to make sure that we as a team have access to the very same resources when we need them, and the legal is a big thing. So whether they are and the right resource when you need them. And again, you don't know if you need them for more than just day-to-day or if you need them for a claim. Again, as you'll notice, we work with our attorneys quite frequently, and this is the first time in 2 years we've had a claim. And so it's been a very different experience than it had been previously when we had a claim. And she had shared her experience. So again, the resources matter, and we utilize them daily.
Dr. Foley, thank you for answering that. I know that in the past, and previous board members didn't know, but we had an in-house attorney. I call it an outhouse. Yeah, you're all gonna make fun of me forever, and that's fine. It's on the tape. In-house attorney, so that some of the day-to-day would be referred to her. But now that Mrs. Good retired, the day-to-day is not in-house, and so we've had to look for some of those
And
questions,
President
correct?
Reese, Board Member Kaler, I think one of the things your admin team would say is, while we loved having an in-house attorney, the in-house attorney would have to rely on outsourcing this on it, because these are such niche situations, case by case. Quite honestly, the example is, we've been working with the lawsuit that we recently had. We'd be working with an attorney, would have to switch to another attorney, but the attorney who's representing the other district also represented this family in the Ninth Circuit Court. So again, every time you change, I can't imagine changing to an attorney that wasn't an Arizona special ed law attorney. They may be great litigation attorneys. They may be great day-to-day, but they're not. We would prefer to work with those who are expertise in the area and field who guide us. And we utilize their guidance office. Often, I can count on my hand multiple times this week where we would pick up the phone and say, we have an issue with this contract, we have an issue and concern with this teacher, we're going to proceed in this way. Do you have any concern? This is our attorney if we were to proceed this way. And sometimes they guide us carefully and say, nope, that will cause, you could potentially, or you're putting yourself in a position where you will be vulnerable, you could be liable. Okay, guide me, what do I need to do? Us to have that will save us from having to likely go to litigation. So whether you prepay it or whether we set it aside to be able to utilize the preferred guidance, it's essential to your team to have that. We do not although we loved Linda, I don't think that putting a salary for a specific person would be as beneficial as just having the ability to utilize the right person for the right resource, because before we were utilizing her to work through them to come back to just work with them directly. And not that she wasn't wonderful, but again, I think we use them for, lots of things. When we're creating policies, when we're creating handbooks, when we're creating issues with teachers that are coming forward or that we need to be thoughtful about how we word things. Before we bring an IGA to you, a memorandum of understanding, before we assign and agree to the district, we would have someone from a legal counsel review it to give us guidance. You would want us to have that. So, and again, we would want to be able to work with the attorneys we have confidence in who provide us the resources. This year, as I kind of referenced earlier, we used the resources that our colleagues would share with us, that the attorneys who work with them through the trust had created. We would share it, modify it, and then send it, because again, it wasn't being created for us. And again, we were able to get the resource. We borrowed it and modified it and then had our legal counsel review it. But again, just a different way of getting the information.
Dr. Foley, thank you. What was the name of the day-to-day attorney?
The day-to-day attorney was the Jackson Lewis Law Firm, and again, our cabinet pulled it up. Not that we are saying that they are not wonderful. We don't recognize any of them, and it's a larger group that has practices all across the United States. I am sure they're very knowledgeable and very reputable. But from a day-to-day thing, usually the issues that happen day-to-day, the history that we have with that attorney saves us when it's time to go to litigation, starting all over again, or getting the question, why did you do that? We wouldn't have advised you to do that.
My concern is that when I go to the ASB Law Conference every year, it's Udall Shumway, it's Gus Rosenfeld. These are the attorneys' names, and I've seen maybe Jackson & Jackson has presented at the ASBA Law Conference. I have no idea, but that would be a question for me to know if they are actively involved in the Arizona school law and are actively participating even with our ASBA.
President Reese, Board Member Haler, I would never want to profess to you something that I would be lying, misspeaking otherwise. I am sure they are wonderful, reputable attorneys. They are not names that all of us who attend state meetings have worked with, learned from, or are consulted with on any of our things on a daily basis.
Are they a school board attorney, or are they a school attorney, this Jackson Lewis law?
I think they're a general,
just
they-
general? They're
general
more
practice. I'm
general,
sure they
not
have
school.
people in their practice who are education, but I will tell you that an attorney for another, for an education attorney in another state is different than Arizona. We're a little peculiar. We just are. Arizona is a lot different. And we have, I mean, from, like I said, this is more than just litigation things. These are day-to-day things like policies, new laws, we're rolling things out. You know, legally, we're getting ready to be potentially needing to look at the training we provide our administrators for curriculum and controversial topics and potential litigation fees of up to $5,000 if we, you know, have teachers who break this. I mean, so these are things that if we, you know, don't have guidance for on a daily basis, it could be problematic.
Dr. Foley, just real quick, as we were talking about that, but that's part of our coverage with ASBA, though, correct? I mean, we use them for our policies. We make sure they create them, they make sure they update them, they push them out to us to make sure, from a policy standpoint, that's what our membership of ASBA helps cover, and we have access to, as far as policies, we have access to the ASBA law team to make sure that we're following the policies they're updating, and we're part of their membership that makes sure that we're in compliance.
Yes, they do help us with those policies. Where we get help with our legal counsels when we need to amend them. If you'll recall, earlier this year, we had our policy, our face mask policy, that we ended up needing to amend. Part of the reason we needed to amend was guidance from our legal counsel to prevent litigation. So sometimes their help is in refining our policies that guide our practice to help us stay out of litigation. And this was in reference to our face mask policy, you'll remember.
Did ASBA provide our face mask policy and then we amended it?
We amended it,
I remember amending it, but did ASBA provide that policy, the original one, for us, or did we amend it first before we adopted it?
I believe we did a whole lot of amending on our specific policy. The one that they had was very general, very vague, and we did not amend it as, we did not take it as copyrighted. So oftentimes, but we did it in consultation with an attorney because we knew we wanted to have something that we were, I mean, you had an official policy. Some people adopted it with a copyrighted, and hence they didn't have to come back and change it. We had to come back and change it because we had our own policy.
Thank you.
Which was no.
I didn't mean to open up such a big can of worms, Mr. Haas, but.
No, thank you. Thank
Sorry.
you. Very good questions. So just to circle back and put a bow on the prepaid legal thing, this year's a good example to look at why, you know, as you think, is this something we want or don't want? It's been a weird year, let's just say that, and it can't end soon enough from everybody's perspective, I think, but because it's a weird year, there's been lots of issues that have come up that are not formulaic, you know. We've been very busy dealing with all this, as you have too. And that prepaid legal, one of the advantages is certainty of expense to you. And so that's something to think about. Even the year before that, you think about all the Red for Ed stuff that was going on, that created a lot of upset and worry about what's going on. And so the last 2 years are you know, a good thing to think about is this a value to the district or not? I will also acknowledge, you know, the Mahoney Group has something there for you on this too, the hotline, or the access to the Jackson Lewis firm. But I want to point out to you some of the limitations of that. And I'll read from the material that the Mahoney Group provided to me about that in response to one of our follow-up questions. The hotline is available Monday to Friday from 8:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time. I know Ms. Martins has my cell phone, and I want her to have it. I know Dr. Foley has my cell phone. I want her to have it. I know they have Jennifer's cell phones as well. What can I use this service for? The hotline is for general legal overview. It is not intended to provide a determinative answer. as to whether a specific adverse personnel action should be taken. It's good for what it does, but if Ms. Martins calls me after 6 p.m. Eastern Time and says they have a hot personnel item, and I say, well, my answer is not intended to provide a determinative answer as to whether a specific adverse personnel action should be taken, she's not going to be too happy with that, is my guess. Nor should she be, in my view. And so, again, this is a valuable add-on service to you, but our task that we've been asked to do is to highlight distinctions for you so you can make assessments.
Mr. Haas, again, another question, sorry. Does President Reese have access to that phone number, and could she use that service as well as president of the board? Because I know last year I was president of the school board and there was an issue and I had to seek outside counsel ASAP. Is that the same coverage?
Okay. Yes. Certainly dealing with us, we don't want this to be the case, and hope it never is, but there are instances where the superintendent and the board aren't getting along. Our client is the district. You would have direct access to your lawyer in that instance. Okay. Another issue is the workers' compensation piece. I know there has been some frustration with the district's experience with workers' compensation, some concerns about the level of service and communication and support that they received. Again, that carrier will be changing, but the Alliance does underwrite insurance, workers' compensation insurance for many, many school districts. The proposed carrier from the Mahoney Group, Copper Point, used to be called the State Fund. They underwrite many, many policies as well, but it's more for general business matters. And there may be instances where that becomes significant. Those are some of the pros and cons that we see here for you. I will say both vendors offer some value-added services, trainings, inspections, supports, those sorts of things. Our assessment is the trust has a little bit of an edge in that area. It's all Arizona focused. It's primarily school focused, and that's a big marketing point for the trust. Again, you pay for that, and it's just up to you whether that's a valuable service to the district or not. My final point would be, as you look at insurance policies, there are a claims-made policy, there is an occurrence policy. And that's important because the policy kicks in, if it's an occurrence, when the occurrence happened. Even though you may not learn about it for a while, when the occurrence happened, that's how the policy is written. Whereas if it's a claims-made policy, when the claim is made, that's when you decide whether there's coverage or not. And I've asked, so there was some, of course, most of the policies that are being proposed to you are occurrence-based policies, which is, in our view, is the preferable approach. But we did ask some follow-up questions on that, and in two areas in particular: educators' legal liability, which is a lot of personnel stuff, and police professional liability. The information the Mahoney Group provided to me indicates that those are claims-made policies, and the retroactive date on each, meaning how far back the new carrier would look to decide whether there was coverage on this claims-made basis, is July 1st, 2021. So if you're leaving a current carrier and moving to a new carrier, there is a possibility where there's a window of time where you would not have coverage. And so you may have heard the term tail coverage before. You buy another policy to cover that little slice. Again, in these two areas, educators' legal liability, police professional liability, the retroactive date on the policy would only go to July 1st, 2021. So if you do go with the Mahoney Group, we may want to look into this, whether there's a need for some tail coverage in those two particular areas. With that, happy to answer any other questions that you have. And I don't know if, Jennifer, you want to piggyback off of.
The only other point I would like to make is just to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples. And one point that was raised by the Mahoney Group, which is that the trust coverage is the 40 million plus the 10 million is for all the school districts they insure. So it is a pooling approach. The Mahoney Group, the coverage is solely for Higley. So I want to make sure that point is heard as well. So thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate being recognized as counsel for the district and as education counsel. We are here to help, and we really appreciate that you all recognize that and receive our information.
Thank you. I have a question. Curtis, on that third slide, it's titled Historic Costs for Workers' Comp. So if we pull that up, am I understanding this slide to be we had an additional $50,000 in legal fees for workers' comp issues?
Madam President, if I might answer that question. The $50,000 in fees, that number, my understanding, and that this is from your Business Services Department, is that is the cost that the district expended this year without Ms. Good, who I have a great deal of respect for. So that is the cost that you all expended for fees that were not covered by any of your liability policies. So for instance, there's been a discussion of the lawsuit and the pending claim, and that has been assigned to our office. And so we are assisting, and you are not paying directly for Gus Rosenfeld fees. That $50,000 would be fees that you had to pay to get general questions answered this year.
Okay, so that's not directly related to historical workers' comp information.
No.
That is in general our just additional legal costs outside of legal coverage regarding claims, like you said, our day-to-day, which that, and I know you guys at the beginning also said that you estimate that to go up before the end of the year, which it has been a crazy year.
Yes.
It's hard because we don't have a lot of information prior to craziness because we were with the trust, and then we also had Miss Good, who provided some guidance and legal advice. But our legal costs here too is we've had a really crazy year, and a whole lot of legal stuff came up really fast because we were given executive orders that we were expected to follow right away, but no one knew. You guys were trying to figure it out just as we're all calling you guys. You're like, I know it's there, but I got to find out. So, and that legal cost also references some of our we've had to have superintendent contracts reviewed. Some unusual items that we did have to seek outside legal counsel for that we typically would not have. So I was just clarifying that because that cost, what our legal cost has been is actually the difference between the cost of the trust and the cost of the Mahoney Group. So like Dr. Foley said, bottom line, we've determined who our attorneys are going to be, whether that's through prepaid or if we go with a lower cost in premium, that money would be set aside for legal cost. So I did just notice that it's actually almost identical of what we have here versus what the difference in cost of the two policies are. If we have the trust policy without the add-on prepaid, I think it's like literally $115 difference, what we have here versus the difference in cost. So, so that is still an option that, based on what we have paid in legal costs, that we can have that set aside, still have our attorneys of choice for our day-to-day as well. So thank you for that clarification. I was a little concerned if we had that legal cost for workers' comp outside of claims, because then something's not right. So, any other questions?
I think Mrs. Martins had something to say about the workers' comp part of the side of this. Is there something more you can, I don't want to just make a decision tonight on cost. I want to make a decision based on the people that have to work every day with these groups, whether it's the Mahoney Group or the Trust. And I want to make sure that I'm completely informed by you all. How has the experience been? Some of you have obviously been in the Trust prior, and then now the Mahoney Group. So I'm trying to get a feel of the environment and the day-to-day work, because I don't work with them on a day-to-day basis. It's not me. I have to entrust you all to do that. So I guess I want to hear more from the experience side. So because we're going to be on the spot tonight, I believe, making a decision. So I just want to be as informed as I possibly can be.
Certainly. President Reese, Vice President Wilson, Board Member Kaler, thank you for the opportunity for me to share my perspective. So I joined Higley Unified School District about 4 years ago, and at the time we were carried by the Trust. And I could tell you, in terms of themes of what we've discovered when we made the transition, and I'll only talk about through our own experiences in the department, and Dr. Fowler and I had an opportunity to talk and connect because his department covers and accesses and does the liability in terms of the carrier, where our Department of Human Resources does the workers' compensation component. So amongst the themes that we had concerns about when we made the transition, they were over customer service and support, the amount of work and follow-up, training and professional development, and opportunity, so in terms of resources overall. So when we first moved over, there was a lot of discussion about that the services wouldn't be any different, both from the Mahoney Group as well as previously Dr. Thomason, who was our superintendent that just retired. So we wanted to make sure that we were very clear that there weren't going to be differences and changes, because we were concerned from an aspect of we're a small department, so making sure that we have the right resources and accessing the right information for individuals and not putting an overburden on our team. So what we discovered initially in terms of that customer service and support was that when we were with the Alliance and the Trust, that support was up here. The communication and what we were presented was that they would align. However, in terms of those first, I'd say 6-7 months of the transition, it was not up to par. And the Mahoney Group and Liberty Mutual, in terms of our experiences, was under par. Will I say, did they do everything in terms of from a legality component in terms of the information from workers' comp? Yes. But from the customer service support side of it, we would used to go to the Trust and things would get taken care of and we didn't have to worry about it, and they went above and beyond in helping us with accessing resources for our employees if they had to go in terms of a fast med or finding a medical provider because their injury, they had something that happened that they didn't have a provider for. So they would work with us to get that information. And there were hiccups, and just like with any transition, there's always hiccups. So the transition of the new platform, as well as reporting, we weren't getting the right reporting information from the right people and the phone numbers. And when you do anything new, people don't always call the right places and don't necessarily know. They're calling a 1-800 number, but doesn't necessarily know who's behind that 1-800 number too, right? So we had some dynamics of that. That was part of it. But certainly from our perspective, and we talked with Mr. Edwards, and we had an opportunity to also talk with the representatives from Liberty Mutual to say, like, hey, something's not working. We don't like this. Help us get this to work right, or help us understand what we're not doing right to where we're having these concerns and these issues and the follow through with this. So we actually did have a couple of conference calls, and Mr. Edwards met with some of our employees so that way they could establish those procedures. But really what we felt happened was that we just reset our expectations and said, this is just how it's going to be. We've made it work. But from a customer level support area, overall, we still feel that it doesn't compare to what the customer service and support we got from the trust. So the amount of work and follow-up, that's the second theme that we had, and that really ties into that customer service and support in regards to the fact that we had had examples and we'd had situations in which when we called the trust, again, just a stamp of a finger, they took care of it, they had all the information, and we wouldn't get anything else until it was completed or notification that everything was completed and they had sent out the individuals needed to do the job. Where consistently, whenever we had to hand anything in from Liberty Mutual, we consistently always got a phone call 24, 48 hours later to say, hey, we need more information. But we provided you all the information. You have everything. So there was always an additional follow-up in which our experience with the trust was that we made the phone call, we gave them the information, we gave them the same type of information, and they were able to handle and produce for us what we needed. And then the last item and theme that we had concerns with was training and professional development and opportunity. So many individuals may or may not know, if we participated in certain conferences or we did certain things or our employees participated in certain trainings, we got discounts off of our carrier for the trust. As well as the fact that going back to where when you are involved with a large pool of individuals in which they are similar fields to you, there's the benefit is that the trust also did an annual conference every year in which we could send our employees to that worked under these areas of workers' comp and liability insurance, and they would get updated information. And we didn't have those same resources. We did get emails. We were on a listserv with Liberty Mutual and on a listserv with the Mahoney Group, but there wasn't an opportunity for a conference or actually participating and going. I will say that COVID changed everything, and there's webinars that were available, but sometimes some of the information that came across, I know I reached out to our Liberty Mutual representative on 2 occasions because I had gotten their national update, like participate in this webinar, and when I tried to look more into it, I wasn't able to access it. So there was a disconnect, and I feel, and this is from the perspective of human resources and support services, I can't speak to other areas, but from my own experiences, my expectation is also that the Mahoney Group was a broker for Liberty Mutual, who happened to be the carriers for most of them. And so as a broker, he and Mr. Edwards should also take responsibility in those areas. And we would have wished that the accountability was there more often, or in working with us as a client more often than we saw in terms of the response and the follow-up. So I do want to go back to what Dr. Foley, Mr. Haas, and Ms. McLennan have mentioned in terms of not only resources with legal, but also in terms of, yes, it has been unusual times and it has been unusual years, but I could also speak towards the fact that when I got here, and some of you may or may not know, but I've been in human resources for over 16 years. Where I had come from previously, we had a firm on retainer, and they were one of the largest educational firms in the state that I had worked with. When you develop a relationship and a rapport, as both Rob Haas and Ms. Jennifer McLennan mentioned, you then feel comfortable calling them on their cell phones at all times and hoping they'll call you back. When you don't have that rapport, especially if you have an emergency that happens on a Sunday night at 9 o'clock, you don't feel as though you have the opportunity, and what I didn't realize was this 1-800 number had limited components in which you could call that number. And Mr. Haas and Ms. McLennan, as well as the other firm that we have talked about, Udall Shumway, we have such great relationships with them that what was wonderful is all throughout COVID or anything that occurred, they would always say, we'll get you the resources that we helped put the trust together, or we'll get you the resources in which we helped put together with another school district. So it was always wonderful to know that through our relationship and what we had developed over time, they were always willing to give us the information that we needed to be able to do what the follow-up had to be done. And then if we had to tweak it and work with them or consult back with them as necessary in the bigger picture. And that's just, in my opinion, something that you can't put a dollar amount to, because of the fact that you want to be able to know that they know me, I know them. I can sometimes anticipate what I think I might hear back from one of them, or from, even with Denise Lowell-Britt from Udall Shumway, who I had worked with too, and just being able to dialogue in a way that doesn't put any pressure, and maybe sometimes you can throw out crazy ideas that make no sense, but then work through that or determine what's best for the district as well as what's legal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martins. I just had a quick question too. I was on the procurement committee, and part of the procurement and went through a couple years ago when we went through this before. It was my understanding that the Mahoney Group was going to provide us a direct resource. So I'm hearing what you're saying. Did we not have that supplied resource that was only for us?
Thank you, President Reese, for asking that question. So we were under that understanding also. When one of the things, and I vividly remember this because it was a huge concern, in cabinet, we asked, well, how are these going to differ? And Dr. Thomas said they weren't going to differ. And Linda Good at the time said, my main concern is the prepaid legal component. And so we were told they weren't going to differ. Shortly after the transition, we were told then that we did not have that service available to us. In our full-day training, both Liberty Mutual and Mr. Edwards through the Mahoney Group did tell us that we would have a 1-800 number to be able to utilize if necessary. And then also, and I can't tell you the timeline on that, but later came back and said, you know, you could first use anybody you wanted to use, but then there was a concern about a conflict of interest that Liberty Mutual had with Udall-Shumway. And so they had said that we would prefer that you not use Udall-Shumway when the time comes. So the 1-800 number was presented. I did not receive that 1-800 number right away. And then my concern of that 1-800 number, even though in that training that we participated in was that there would be Arizona attorneys, it wasn't a confirmation. But ideally, at that time, the discussion was that they believe it would be Arizona attorneys, but we wouldn't necessarily know who, and we wouldn't necessarily know that they had expertise in the education area. They might have just had general expertise in relation to employee relations, other components. And I don't even believe Ms. Miller took place in that training. I don't think you were offered the opportunity. It was just Dr. Fowler's team and the human resources team at the time. And so through our conversations and my concerns, what Dr. Thomason offered as an alternative was that we would take some of the cost savings that we had from the Mahoney Group and the trust and put that money aside to then utilize for day-to-day services as needed. And as a result, what you've seen, we've been able to do that. You know, Mr. Haas and I had a conversation. Overall, we have not needed to maybe utilize the services of legal as much as others in the past, but that has shifted and that has changed. And I can tell you from what I have seen in my experience in human resources, I think it's going to continue to shift in a direction from the employee relations side that's going to continue to need legal advice just from the issues and the things that I've had to investigate and work on in the last 6-7 months.
The themes will be Title IX, controversial curriculum, and special education will be our hot topic themes without doubt.
So, but we didn't have a dedicated person to help us with workers' comp claims or things like that, because that was my understanding, is that we would have a dedicated person that would help HR and everything get through those claims.
So we did get a dedicated person. There were some concerns, and so we actually then got switched to a different person. And I can't speak about the back end and why we got switched, but some of it did have relation to the fact that we weren't getting information timely.
President Reese. Dr. Foley, you can distribute the question how you'd like to. For the Mahoney Group and the trust, is there additional coverage for the gap? I heard you say that there may be a need for gap coverage with one or maybe both. Is there a need for gap coverage with either group? Do you know what I'm saying? Thank you.
I will, you know what, I'm going to let the two of you respond to that.
I'm not sure I understand. So do you have a question?
The gap.
So gap coverage, I heard something was spoken about gap coverage for one or maybe both of these, the options, and I wanted to know, do we need gap coverage, A? Because if we need gap coverage, that would be important to note right now, and how much that would be, either group that we go with tonight.
She was talking about the workers' comp, that if there's an injury, because either way, if we stay with the Mahoney Group, we're going to a new carrier, or if we switch over to the trust, then that's a new carrier. What happens with any claims? Because you had mentioned that like, they won't even look back and,
There was a gap in our coverage.
Okay, I'll be happy to field
Yeah, June to
that
July.
question.
Thank you.
President Reese, Board Member Wilson. Again, one of the things that you should think about is the trust has kind of it's a one-stop shop, if you will, for coverage. The Mahoney Group's current proposal involves a number of new carriers for you. And so when you're talking about changing carriers, you want to make sure there is no gap in coverage, which is some of the information we've asked them to provide us to look into that issue. On these two particular policies, the educator's legal liability policy and the police professional liability policy, the effective date would be July 1st. So could you negotiate a date back? You know, if you went with the Mahoney Group, could you negotiate a date further back than that, as they've apparently done on some of the other policies? Perhaps. If not, is there a commercially viable product for that? Most likely, yes. I don't know what the cost of that would be, but I know that everybody would be interested in making sure that there is full coverage for the district.
now, I'm just speaking to my experience as a business owner. If I've changed workers' comp, if my policy's expired and I've gone with another one, if the injury occurred while that workers' comp policy was in effect, then that's who that employee goes to. And if there's an injury that occurs from that date forward, then you go to the new policy, is typically how I've learned how, the bottom line, I was covered by a carrier up until this date. So if there was an injury, that carrier's supposed to take care of it. Now, I say supposed to, so could you run into some things? Maybe, but the carrier, whoever was your carrier at the time of the injury, is the one who's supposed to cover it.
Absolutely, President Reese. And people don't call us to say everything worked out the way they hoped they would. We usually get the calls that there was a little bit of a glitch. And so that's why we're looking into this. Again, could you negotiate a date further back on those two particular policies? Maybe so.
Do you know how that would work if we chose to go with the trust? Because at that point, we're changing carriers as well. So, do you have any idea where would we have to look at providing that? Do you know, is the trust willing to go back, or is it assumed that, because again, either way, no matter which way we go tonight, we're changing carriers. Mm-hmm. So, the only thing the same is if we go with the Mahoney Group, we stay with the company, the Mahoney Group, but our actual carrier changes. Mm-hmm. If we choose to go with the trust, our actual carrier changes. Yeah. So do we know, I know you pointed that out for the Mahoney Group. Do we know about the trust?
I would defer to Mr. Cole on that point. He could probably answer that better than me with more authority than me.
And we're not permitted to do that, so. Okay. It was brought up for the Mahoney Group as to why we're still changing carriers if we go to the trust, so.
We will make sure that there's full coverage, whichever option you choose.
Mr. Haas? Again, how many districts are with the trust in the state of Arizona?
I don't know exactly. There's about 250 districts and maybe 15 community colleges.
247?
And I think probably 95% of those, if not more, are covered by the trust.
Mr. Cole reported 240 earlier. 240 districts are with the trust.
Okay. And Mr. Haas, how many districts does the Mahoney Group cover?
I don't know the answer to that. I know the Liberty Mutual covered Higley, and we're hopeful of branching out from there, but I'm not aware of any success in that area.
Thank you.
I just have one more question.
If I may, I should say, charter schools, whole new ball of wax. I think there would be a variety of private carriers that would insure the charter schools. But traditional public school districts, community college districts, almost exclusively insured by the trust.
Are there any that you know of that have left the trust for another insurance group and have gone back? Sorry.
I'm not aware of that. That's not to say it hasn't happened, Board Member Schultz. I'm just not aware of that.
Thank you.
And so we're looking at a one-year thing. So is that correct? Is that what the proposal is, 1 year? So potentially going with the Mahoney Group, we could be changing carriers again in a year. We don't have a multi-year agreement. Is that what I'm understanding, is that?
A very good question, President Reese. The premium proposals are for 1 year.
1 year.
It's possible we could do this all again next year, yes.
Okay.
But really, I think if you were comfortable with it, it would be a much more streamlined process next time, getting the premium proposal and going from there.
Well, and I just want to clarify too, also for our other board members, I think for Dr. Foley, I think that the process we've used by bringing you guys in and helping compare, this did not come before the board again last year. We had the procurement process. Mahoney Group was chosen, and then the next year it did not come before the board again. So it came under consent for the approval of the expense, but there was no discussion if any changes or coverage or anything like that had happened. And then after the fact, we were made aware of a large amount of money that was then added on with other coverage that we were not aware of and was not part of the procurement process. So hence we are trying to definitely make sure we are following a process and procedure, and that's why Dr. Foley had also referenced that timelines were created and that it will get on the calendar every year so that we know this time of year this is going to be reviewed. This will come before the board. It will be discussed. Now, there are some times that there is no change, and here's, like we do with our health insurance, premium changed this amount, but we're not doing that. I understand we're in a very different scenario. This is not very common. To answer Mrs. Kaler's question, is not very many districts are not with the trust. And so the fact that we left the trust a couple years ago and now we're back to doing this, we've made it very clear though that the board needs to be aware of what our coverage is every year and has to be involved in that process and the cost and know what we're getting for that. So that might clarify a little bit as to why we're doing this in a little bit different format. And again, you guys have made it very clear. You represent Higley Unified School District. You don't represent the Mahoney Group. You don't represent the trust. Now, could you be attorneys for preferred attorneys for carriers through the Mahoney Group? Could you be preferred attorneys through the trust? Sure. But bottom line, we see dollar amounts. You are employed through the Higley Unified School District to represent us to make sure that we are covered. So I appreciate that. But I hope that, I know because we have some newer board members, and so we are in a little bit different scenario.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, because I've been sitting here spinning trying to figure out why we're here doing this, and then I see the history with the trust, and when we're Mahoney, now trust is back on the board. So this is a yearly thing that's normally brought up through procurement, and now it's going to be a board discussion. Am I understanding this correctly?
President Reese, Board Member Anderson, this was a unique, as she was sort of sharing the history with you, going back to the theme you've heard an awful lot of was administration processes and procedures. Actually, the way that the governing board initially approved this was actually a voucher. It was in the vouchers. It actually hadn't come to you as a consent agenda item, which is a problem in the fact that anything that over 100, in our own policies, anything over $100,000 comes to you, even if they are have gone through procurement as a purchase. So there was concern from the fact, well, first of all, it didn't come the way it should have come as an annual renewal, and it came late. But then it was, why is this different than it had been before? We needed to do an analysis. Obviously, there had been a transition. Had we realized the costs that we had think, as you know, we've been talking about funds, processes and procedures, and understanding our funds. Where we spend things. We've had new people in finance looking at this. And so we were asked by the governing board at the time to bring forward both proposals this year for us to look at thoroughly so that we could make a decision when we were doing the approval process. Normally what happens is that you go through the procurement process, you pick a vendor, you do the renewal, you bring it in, it would be a consent, typically a consent agenda item in which you would approve that. It's typically not done, we did like a small procurement format this time, in which we said, let's look at both, let's understand them, there are going to be changes. Quite honestly, even if we had not looked at the trust, there were going to be changes to Liberty Mutual's coverage and carrier. We should thoroughly review it with an attorney. Here was our policy before, here's what we have now, what are their changes, so that we could answer those questions. So annually, every year, this is something we have to do, and we would bring to you typically historically in consent. But this one came a little different this year because of how historically it had been handled from the processes that as Board Member Reese clarified, President Reese clarified perfectly, there was an issue in how we had not approved it appropriately, and so we addressed it and then moved forward for this year. So hence, this year's a little different.
And for the history from being with the trust and then going to Mahoney's, what are you able to explain why there was the change? Was that because of the process, or did something occur?
Great question. So there, just like President Reese had said, there was an RFP, a request for proposal, and they did a study to look at different options to see if there was a benefit to moving carriers, in which they decided to do. So, yeah. And
That was strictly a cost perspective at the time. And then I believe because last year we were not brought back to have the discussion, we weren't able to even ask the questions and follow up and say, how has the service been? So this is why I kind of asked tonight. I do want to look at a dollar amount. Obviously, we are in charge of a very large budget, but I also want to look at the product and how has it worked for Higley, and how has it worked for the people that do it every day. So that was kind of why I was asking a lot of those questions tonight, Mrs. Anderson, sorry. If that gives you anything. I would tell you that when I, just a little story, I went to the Philadelphia National School Board Association convention in Philadelphia a couple years ago, and this was shortly after, I believe, that we had left the trust. And so I'm at an ASBA, they do happy hours and they host different events. And so I would introduce myself, hi, I'm from Higley. Oh, you're the ones that left the trust. That was who I was known by at a national convention. So if that gives you any idea that leaving the trust was a very big deal, and that's how I was known at that convention. So.
And Mrs. Anderson also, yes, I sat on that committee, and we went through it. It wasn't all about cost, it was about coverage. And like Mr. Haas has brought up, that, are we part of, and everyone has the access to the same pot, or are we part of having our own? And insurance is a tricky thing, because you have insurance to make sure you're covered, and you want the appropriate amount of coverage, but then it's also likelihoods of things. I mean, granted, the likelihood of us going through a pandemic, I wish I was able to bet on that a while ago, and, I could have really made out, but, I mean, things do happen. But we did go through and look at the different coverages. They were pretty comparable. We looked at cost. And so at that time, based on what we had received, it was a committee of several. Transportation was on there, finance, someone from student services. There was a variety of people. And I believe we started with 3, and then it came down to 2, and we asked for, their best and final. And then through a lot of conversation, through each of us ranking them for different things, the Mahoney Group had the products that we thought would cover the district, as well as there was a cost savings. And also at the time, again, a lot keeps coming back to prepaid legal. At the time, this was 3 years ago, we went through this for 2 years of coverage. Ms. Good was here. So the prepaid legal, while it was important, it wasn't the end-all be-all either. We did have our in-house attorney. We still budgeted for our outside legal that we prefer. So again, the cost savings, and that's why I quickly did the math on, okay, based on what we've paid in legal, doesn't make sense. And then just at this point, we have to also look at what coverage do we need? Because are we paying for stuff that we don't need? I mean, we know insurance, oh, you get this, and as a bonus, you get this. And it's like, well, I don't need that. And then you look over here and you get what you need. So it wasn't cost alone that drove us to change from the trust to the Mahoney Group. So, but again, full disclosure, there was later on additional add-ons with additional coverages that we as a board weren't aware of that came at additional costs. And so as a board member, that was concerning to me. I mean, that raised a red flag to me, like going, what's going on? Because I sat on that committee and I saw the packages and I compared, and I knew what we were getting and I knew what the cost was. And then to see additional cost come through, that was concerning to me. And so that hence is why now we are going to have a process and a timeline for this. So I hope that makes sense. But I did. It was not all cost-driven. It was product-driven on what, as a school district, we need. What we need as Higley may not be the same thing as Phoenix Union needs, So, so there was a lot of discussion about that.
And as you brought up, Higley a year ago is not possibly going to need different Higley this year or future years. So thank you for all of you bringing that together, because I just sat there spinning for a while like, why are we doing this? So we will, next year, we will have another discussion. Is that what I'm understanding? And will it go up for a whole new group, or are we just discussing, like, are we going to be having to choose again?
We should not be. This is not something we should be doing every year. We should, if we need to do this, because this was a weird year, we would normally go through the RFP process, and there would be procurement, a whole different process. As board members, we would not be sitting here. We would be asking questions for sure, but we would not be solely getting this information. It would be based on a recommendation from a committee who went through an RFP.
Entire process, correct.
President Reese, just for background, then what you're saying is in the additional policies and additions were hidden in a sense?
They came after.
Right, so but when they were approved, then the board approved them, they were hidden in vouchers or hidden in different language?
It did not come as a consent agenda item, like separate. It did come in vouchers, and then as we were going through vouchers is where it came to our attention. So we were not, as a board, aware that there was different changes and things like that for an overall cost.
Okay, and then the pretty package that you were given and based on, from the Mahoney Group, then wasn't executed according to Ms. Mums, correct? I mean, Ms. Martins, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Ms.
That's
Martins,
okay. I've got a
excuse me.
unique name, so I'm kind of used to it. But President Reese, Board Member Schultz, correct. From my perspective, in my opinion, from what we were dialogued and shared with, not being part of the RFP committee was different than the result that which we got. And as I said, really those major themes in the areas that mattered to us, customer service support, amount of work and follow-up, and training, professional development resources.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was not aware of the, again, in the RFP process, we were advised that Higley would have a dedicated resource to help us through all that, because that was part of the conversation with the RFP process, is the ease of the access through the trust. And if we were going through a different carrier, that we were supposed to have our own dedicated person. I was not aware, because we had, like Mrs. Kaler said, we made a huge change, and we weren't able to come back and circle back around to find out how it went and everything. So we weren't aware of their experience in that aspect.
And just really fast, this is kind of a fast thing for us tonight to be able to vote on this, and getting an email at 3:15 that changes things. If we have to do this next year or something like this, is this something? Okay, that's what I want to.
Yes, Mrs. Schultz, I'll be very honest, I was shocked to get an email this afternoon at 3:15 at the 9th hour. I think it's completely unprofessional, in my opinion, and that sent a lot of red flags for me tonight alone, just asking these questions, because I just don't think that was appropriate to send board members directly even a last-minute email. And no offense to you whatsoever personally, I just think as a professional, it was not professional. And that scares me when I hear then the other stories of having troubles along the way. I believe that there's some issues here that we didn't address sooner.
Do you guys have any other questions for Mr. Hawes, or do you have anything else to add with your presentation as we've just sat here?
No. Happy to answer any further questions. I have nothing further to add. Thank you.
Okay. If we don't have any further discussion, then we can move on to our action item. We can still have discussion here too. If anyone wants to make a motion or a recommendation based on the information they've heard.
I'll make a motion. I move that the governing board award our district property casualty and workers' compensation for the 2021-2022 fiscal year to the trust. Did I say that correctly, Mr. Voss?
I second that motion.
Okay, so here we have a motion to award our property liability workers' comp insurance to the trust. We do have a second. You sit next to me and I still had to look at you. Is there any further discussion? I know we've had a lot of discussion. Go ahead.
I just want to say, I'm not an insurance expert, but hearing from Ms. Martins and the cabinet and our legal team, then it just, I feel better going with the trust overall than going with the Mahoney Group on this. And so that's why I seconded the motion.
Anyone? Any other questions, comments? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Is that you, Michelle? Yeah. Okay. All those opposed? And I am going to abstain. All right, so that motion carries 401. All right. Then we will go on to 8.2. Thank you so much for your time and all the effort and everything that you've put into this. We appreciate it. I know, obviously, it's no small task, and
Our pleasure. Since you are paying us by the hour, we'll leave and let you not get billed.
thank you. All right. So we will go on to 8.2, which is the political agenda. So we can see what we had was our top 5 for the ASBA political agenda. There we go. All right, so we've the top 5 priorities submitted for Higley. Revise the school board finance form. Revise the school. I don't think that's supposed to be school board, is it? I'm reading on our packet.
It's in the packet.
The finance formula, fully fund full-day kindergarten and include kindergartners in the override calculation, accelerate the full restoration of the DAW funding, fully restore 9th grade CTE and JTED funding, and establish financial and academic transparency for all institutions that accept public funds. So I'm purposely not making a motion yet because,
Are we able to discuss?
yeah, what we'll do is we will, I'll move that we discuss and then determine our political agenda.
Second.
Top 5 for political agenda for ASBA.
I'll second that.
All right. So does anyone have any other, there's a lot of information here. This is the political agenda that ASBA puts out. We submit our information on what's important to us. Obviously, all of these issues, they're all public education issues, are important. The ones I read were our 2021, and so we have to figure out our 2022, what our top 5 priorities are. Mrs. Wilson?
President Reese, I really enjoyed reading through these. The 3 that I kind of starred as I was going through was the managing the impact of COVID. I felt like, is that just one, or do they want the minors under it? They would like managing the impact of COVID on public schools, right? That would be.
So I think it includes everything
Yes,
underneath
that's what I
that.
thought.
So
That's
it's
what, yes,
the
so
bullet
that one I
with
feel like we
everything.
need to maybe keep on there. And then since 2021 political agenda, we also mentioned taxpayer accountability. I think that could be a very good one for us as well. I'll read it, it's the red bullet point. Sorry, Curtis, red or maroon. Requires public accountability for taxpayer dollars spent on education. I think both of those 2 lower ones, were important to me as I was reading through it.
These are what the 2021, what's important to us. We don't have to use these if there's other topics that we want to submit. This is what we can submit to the ASBA. This is just a review of what the 2021 is. I agree. COVID's not, the impact of it's gonna.
COVID has not been cheap on our district, and I think the impact of kiddos moving out of district into either homeschool environments, charter schools, or private schools definitely plays an impact on us. And requiring the funding accountability for those institutions, especially our charter school friends, I think that's a big deal. We should all be accountable to the same. Just let us see your budget.
So you're about the public accountability?
Yes, and COVID. And COVID.
All right.
Both are important to me.
Can you put the slide up a little bit, please, Mr.
But
Curtis?
I'm open for any debate and any conversation.
There, that's good. Thank you. Thank you, Curtis. Preserve and strengthen local control. I think I kind of hate that one right now. And I kind of love it too. So I think that that's probably not something that would have been first on my list for, in some areas, I think that one came back to bite us in the you-know-what. So I just don't think that's my priority for the coming year. I think that definitely the funding, full funding, returning district assistance, all of that is, they continue to fight for us in that area, and I appreciate the ASB on that one so very much. Again, also managing COVID, I think that's a huge deal in moving forward, how that looks, and always making an equal playing field when it comes to taxpayer dollars in education in the state of Arizona.
I agree, Mrs. Kaler, with the local control. I believe sometimes we were fighting. I felt like it was more like we were fighting other districts sometimes this year. It felt like we were fighting for students, fighting for what was going on. So I tend to agree with you on it kind of bit us in the bottom.
Well, it's a double-edged sword, but
I like control in some ways, but it is a double-edged sword, I think is.
it is, and I mean, what we had to deal with this past year is different because our control was taken away from us and then it was given back to us after decisions were made. But nonetheless, what this particular political agenda item is talking about funding, because there are restrictions on how we can use certain funds. And so they continue to fight to loosen those restrictions because, again, just like the example I used earlier, what our needs are for our budget and our funding, what we get, what our needs are can be different than other school districts. And for the state to tell us how we have to spend some of that funding is what's difficult. And so that's what a big part of that one is. But
I mean, it was like Red for Ed and then COVID, and COVID said, here, hold my beer. And, like it was really traumatic over the last couple of years in that particular area. So I'm not sure if I want it to be our top 5.
President Reese, I understand what you're saying, though. I've heard of other states having 5 buckets of money, and I believe in Arizona we have 65 buckets of money that I believe, and you guys can correct me, Mr. Gadd, if you'd like, but I believe the difference is very big there. So I understand where your point is, President Reese.
And we're the lowest.
Of course, of course, that's without said. So I get what you're saying, President Reese, on that as well. But I would rather focus, if I had a vote, which I think I do, on the other 2.
Mrs. Anderson, what are your thoughts here? I mean, it's not anything that necessarily, these were the 5 that were a focus of 2021. I'm going to go out on a limb and say COVID monopolized that, but I mean, do you have any thoughts where you feel the district, from a teacher perspective, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
But if you answer, Mrs. Anderson, then you have to be our delegate.
Oh, yes. Yes. I haven't gotten there yet. Come on.
It's coming. It's coming.
I guess the one with the tabs that applies most for the teaching is the equitably fund district schools to at least the national median per pupil funding. There's a lot of bullets under there that really need to be hit and continue to be hit as I sit in a school district, and we need things better funded.
From what I saw coming out of the legislature, and not a lot of these were able to be tackled. I mean, like I said, I think COVID and the impact, I don't think the ASBA was able to really focus on a lot of these. And so in my opinion, I'm good at all 5 of these and putting them as our priority. I think that they, what did I say we have? Ours was the finance formula, I think, which is important. What's not on here, one of ours was to fully fund full-day kindergarten. Another one for Higley was the restoration of the DAW, which is happening. I mean, so they're coming. They're working on it. And fully restoring the 9th grade JTED and CTE eligibility and funding. And then the financial and academic transparency for all institutions that accept public funds. So those are a little bit different than what we see here, but that's what Higley submitted last year.
And I think you're correct, Mrs. Reese, that last year with COVID, it monopolized everything. And I think coming up this year, some of the bills that I've seen coming our way are going to monopolize these anyhow. So I'm really okay with whatever y'all decide, to be very honest, because I think ASBA does keep a good focus. The one thing, student outcome, and it kind of, again, it's a double-edged sword because we do such great student outcome with not a huge pot of money, and that gets thrown back in our face sometimes, and I dislike that so much because they say, well, you do such a great job with so little. You don't need any more money. Well, some districts do, but there's a lot of our outlier districts that are struggling with student outcome, and that gets muddy.
The ASBA also allowed us to submit 2 additional priorities last year, and what we submitted was that we wanted a dedicated funding source for pay raises for support staff, and to rethink and redefine the role and purpose of state standardized testing
Mr. Glover.
and meaningful assessments. So we were able to submit 2 additional. I think that for me, I like the 5 we have. There's just so much. There's so much that needs to be done. I would like to see them continue to work on the financing formula, which I think it kind of goes back to the adequately and equitably fund. It's a combination of both things. If I remember correctly, like our funding formula, Mr. Moore, doesn't that go back to like the 70s? The funding formula that the state uses? Okay. So 1984 is how the funding formula we're using. So I do like that we try and push for that too. All of it, just all of it. Just make it all better, right?
Everything, yeah.
Focus on everything.
Mrs. Reach, that was all of it. We want all. We want it all. Just to let you know, we want it all.
Okay, so if we can get some of these down, I think we talked about manage the impact of COVID, and I think that that's still important because we're no way, shape, form, anywhere near done with this, at least from an educational standpoint. So I think that was one I think everyone kind of chipped in and agreed on. And then the public accountability. So is that one that everyone agreed on, that there should be the same accountability for everyone who uses public funds?
Absolutely.
So that would be a second one. It sounded like we wanted some of the preserve and strengthen local control from a funding standpoint. That's one of ASBA's 2021. Do we want to have that one as well for Higley, or?
Put up number 5.
Okay. As a number 5.
I like Mr. Glover's, I'll shout out to him, his standardized test and meaningful assessment. I really like that. I think we should keep.
I agree. I think that that's
Rereading
important.
that, I really enjoyed that piece. I think we're doing a great job with pay raises to our staff, even though they're not
They're not
funding it.
funding them, but
They're not
we are.
funding it, but we're handling it within ourselves. I would like to see everyone able to do that. Like Board Member Kaler mentioned earlier, there are some lower school districts that aren't able to do that, but if we can only do 5, I would like to take
Well,
a
and these are
rethink and-
Higley's priority, whether
Oh,
they
okay.
take them or not,
Right,
that's
I
up to
think
them.
they're
This is what's important to us. I
Okay.
want everyone in school districts to be covered,
Yes.
but this is what's important to us.
Yeah, rethink and redefine the role and purpose of the state standardized test and meaningful assessments. I like that quite a bit.
I do too.
Doesn't that fall under the Improve Outcomes for All Students tab? It says, the state standardized testing shall not be used for any purposes other than a year-over-year measurement of student growth in the tested subject.
We can just pull a certain bullet point out, though, and make it one of our,
Okay.
we don't have to follow.
We don't have to use the whole. Oh,
Correct.
Oh, good.
So we can pull one out and just kind of say, this
Okay.
is kind of one of our focuses,
Okay.
if
Then
we'd like.
it makes it a lot easier.
Mrs. Reach, is that 4? Or is that all 5?
Manage COVID.
Manage the impact of COVID and public accountability. Then we have funding formula. And we have this assessments. Okay. And then local control. Got them? Okay.
So nothing's on there for the adequately and equitably fund district schools. So we couldn't find anything in that one to add. Or can we do the 2 additional?
They haven't come back and asked us for additional, because when we did the additional, they came back later on and asked for more. And you were, I'm sorry, what one were you just asking?
Equitable, the first one. So the very first tab. The first tab.
So things that fall under,
Adequate.
yeah, so adequately
And,
fund programs.
yeah.
Exceptional student services.
Could put that as our the funding.
That's the one we pulled the formula. Yeah, that's the one that has the formula to adequately update that. Oh, they are asking us for additional. I apologize, Mrs. Anderson. Yes, 2 additional.
Something towards the classroom. I mean, there's several in here. We got fully restore 9th grade CTE, CTED eligibility, and funding to allow students to explore career fields and our certification completion. Allow the CTEDs to serve students through the age of 21. Like, just something, I want to advocate for things that really just hit straight to the classroom, and especially for
The
students that.
CTE one was one we had last year, so we could keep that as an extra.
That would be great. I just pushed that one forward, or I raised my hand for something in that area.
Okay, as another one, the 9th grade CTE JTED funding to restore.
We could put on there funding all-day kindergarten. That's been a hot topic even with our Superintendent Hoffman. So in that regards, we could put that in there if we wanted.
As an additional?
As an additional.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay, so fully funding full-day kindergarten. So that should be 7. So if we agree on those.
Do we need to second this again? Because I second discussion.
No, because part of the motion was to determine. Okay. So if everyone is in agreement with those 5 initiatives and then the 2 additional items for consideration, any other discussion or comments? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So that will carry 5-0, and we will get that submitted to the ASBA. All right. And that will conclude our board meeting for tonight. So I move that we adjourn.
Future agenda items, anything before we move to adjourning?
I was skipping that right now.
Okay, we can if you'd like, but you didn't amend the agenda, so you can't.
I was just, if no one was going to chip in for future, I wasn't going to stop there. Do you have something for future? Okay, well, thanks for asking. No, I figured if someone had something that they would chime in, because it's like we have a lot coming. All right, well, thank you, Mrs. Kaler. Then, again, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Have a good evening.